My father sent me a text saying, "You're no longer my son," after I refused to give my unemployed family $85,000 for my sister's latest fake business scheme. My mother followed up with a handwritten letter banning me from all family events, and my sister Madison launched a vindictive social media campaign calling me a selfish monster who abandoned his struggling family in their time of need. Here's what makes this betrayal absolutely sickening. I've been their personal ATM for 7 years, giving them $987,000 to fund their completely unemployed lifestyle. 7 years of paying for everything while they treated my generosity like an obligation. 7 years of watching 3 grown adults choose dependency over dignity, because why get jobs when your successful son and brother will pay for everything? But my family wasn't just taking my money. They were enjoying every minute of fleecing me. Dad drives around in a BMW that I'm still making payments on, bragging to his friends about his successful retirement. Mom spends her days redecorating their house with my money and posting photos of her purchases on social media. Madison has turned avoiding employment into an art form, bouncing between made-up business ideas that exist only to extract more cash from her brother. When I said no to one payment after giving them nearly $1 million, they acted like I'd committed some unforgivable sin. "After everything we've sacrificed for you," my mother wrote in her letter, "we raised you better than this," my father added in his text. They genuinely believed that birthing me and feeding me as a child entitled them to unlimited access to my construction company profits for the rest of their lives. What these financial parasites didn't realize was that by officially disowning me, they'd just freed me from any obligation to keep funding their pathetic lifestyle. They thought cutting off their love and approval would bring me crawling back with my checkbook. Instead, they'd given me legal and emotional permission to show them what happens when you bite the hand that's been feeding you for 7 years. Within 24 hours of that, "You're not my son" text, I implemented Operation Reality Check, every credit card canceled, every automatic payment stopped, every financial support system I'd built to keep them comfortable completely terminated. They wanted to disown their personal ATM over one refused payment, so I gave them exactly what they asked for: complete financial independence. My family was about to learn that calling someone not your son has consequences when that someone pays for literally everything in your life. To understand how my family could be so confident about disowning their primary source of income, you need to know how I built the construction company that's been funding their unemployment vacation for the past 7 years. I started with a single pickup truck and a basic contractor's license, working 18-hour days to land my first residential projects. Within 3 years, I'd grown the business from a one-man operation to a team of 20 employees handling commercial construction contracts. We were building office complexes, retail centers, and municipal projects that generated the kind of steady revenue that most small business owners only dream about. By year 5, my company was pulling in consistent 7-figure annual profits, and I was making more money than I'd ever imagined possible. I had employees' equipment, a reputation for quality work, and a client base that trusted me to deliver major projects on time and under budget. I built a construction empire while they built their dependency on me. The financial support started innocently enough when my business began taking off. Dad had been laid off from his manufacturing job and was supposedly looking for work while collecting unemployment. I offered to help with his mortgage payments for a few months until he got back on his feet. Mom mentioned that money was tight with Dad out of work, so I started covering some of their utilities and grocery bills. Madison was between jobs again, which seemed to happen every 6 months, so I helped her with rent and car payments until she could find something stable. What I thought would be temporary assistance to help family members through rough patches became a permanent financial arrangement where I was covering every aspect of 3 people's lives. Dad's job search quietly ended when he realized I'd keep making his mortgage payments. Mom's part-time work disappeared when my credit card started covering all her shopping trips. Madison stopped even pretending to look for employment once she discovered that Big Brother would fund whatever lifestyle she wanted. I'd been funding 3 adults who acted like children. The most frustrating part was watching their attitudes change from grateful to entitled, as my support became routine. In the beginning, they'd thank me for helping out and promise to pay me back when things got better. Within 2 years, they were calling with demands instead of requests, expectations instead of gratitude. "I need $1,500 for the car repair," became Dad's standard opening line, not, "Could you help me with the car repair?" Mom would text me shopping lists with the assumption that I'd transfer money to cover whatever she wanted to buy. Madison would announce her latest business idea like I was her personal investor who owed her funding for every entrepreneurial whim. The amounts kept getting larger while the explanations got vaguer, and the gratitude disappeared completely. They'd gone from asking for help to demanding financial support, like I was their employer rather than their family member. They stopped asking and started demanding like it was their money. The breaking point came when Madison called me with her latest business opportunity that required an immediate injection of $85,000. Not a loan, not an investment with terms and accountability, a straight cash transfer to fund what she described as a consulting business that would help other people optimize their lifestyle choices. When I asked her to explain what this insulting business actually involved, she gave me the most vague, buzzword-filled explanation I'd ever heard. She was going to leverage social media platforms to create sustainable income streams through lifestyle optimization coaching. When I asked for specifics about her target market business plan or revenue projections, she got irritated. "Why do you need all these details?" she said. "It's not like you don't have the money. $85,000 is nothing to you. I'm finally trying to start a real business instead of just asking for monthly allowances, and you're giving me the 3rd degree like I'm some stranger asking for a loan." The entitlement was breathtaking. Madison was asking for more money than most people make in 2 years for a business concept she couldn't explain with zero accountability or oversight, and she was annoyed that I wanted details. Madison expected $85,000 like it was pocket change. For the first time in 7 years of unlimited financial support, I told my family, no. Not maybe later, or let me think about it, or can we discuss terms? Just no. I explained that $85,000 was a significant amount of money that required a legitimate business plan, clear objectives, and accountability measures. I told Madison that if she wanted me to invest in her business, she needed to present it like a real business rather than just another creative way to extract cash from her brother. Her reaction was immediate and explosive. "Are you serious right now?" she screamed into the phone. "After everything we've done for you, after all the sacrifices Mom and Dad made to raise you, you're going to nickel and dime your own sister over money you'll never even miss. This is exactly what I was afraid of," she continued. "Success has made you selfish and greedy. You've forgotten where you came from and who supported you before you got lucky with this business. We're your family, Jake. We shouldn't have to beg you for help or jump through hoops like we're strangers." The conversation ended with Madison hanging up on me, but not before delivering her final verdict. "I'm going to tell Mom and Dad exactly what kind of person you've become." I told her no, and suddenly I wasn't family anymore. Madison made good on her threat to involve my parents, but their reaction was even more extreme than I'd expected. Within hours of my refusal to fund her latest scheme, I received a text message from my father that I'll never forget. "You're no longer my son. A real son would support his family instead of abandoning them over money. Don't contact us again until you remember what family means." The message was brutal and final. No discussion, no attempt to understand my perspective, no acknowledgement that I'd been supporting them financially for 7 years without complaint. Just immediate disownment because I'd dared to ask for a business plan before handing over $85,000. What struck me most was how quickly they went from demanding money to cutting me off completely. There was no middle ground, no negotiation, no recognition that I might have valid concerns about throwing that much cash at a business concept that Madison couldn't even explain coherently. Dad texted me that I wasn't his son anymore. My mother's response was even more calculated and vicious. 2 days after Dad's text, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. Not a quick emotional response, but a carefully composed formal notice of my exclusion from the family. After much consideration, the letter began. "Your father and I have decided that you are not welcome at family events until you change your attitude toward family obligations. Your selfish behavior and lack of support for Madison's business venture shows that success has corrupted your values and made you forget the people who sacrificed everything to raise you." The letter went on to detail how disappointed they were in the person I'd become, how money had changed me for the worse, and how they couldn't bear to watch me continue to prioritize wealth over family loyalty. She ended with instructions not to contact them unless I was prepared to make things right with Madison. The hypocrisy was staggering. After 7 years of taking nearly $1 million from me, they were lecturing me about being corrupted by money because I'd refused to give them more. They were banning me from family events while living in a house I was still helping to pay for driving a car I'd bought using credit cards linked to my accounts. Mom sent a handwritten note banning me from family events. But Madison wasn't content with just turning my parents against me. She decided to take our family drama public. Within a week of my refusal, she'd launched a full-scale social media campaign designed to paint me as the villain who'd abandoned his struggling family in their time of greatest need. Her Facebook posts told a carefully edited version of our story. She wrote about her unsupportive brother who'd turned his back on family when they needed him most. She shared emotional posts about how success had changed me, how I'd become cold and calculating since my business took off. The posts were masterfully manipulative, designed to generate sympathy while omitting crucial details, like the fact that I'd been funding her lifestyle for years. She made it sound like I'd refused to help a struggling family member who was down on her luck rather than refusing to throw money at someone who'd never worked and couldn't explain her business idea. Extended family members, who didn't know the full story, started commenting with support for Madison and criticism of my selfishness. Aunts and cousins who'd watched me succeed were now reading posts about how success had made me forget my family obligations. Madison launched a social media campaign painting me as the villain. The week after my family's coordinated attack on my character, I had lunch with Alex, my business partner and closest friend, who'd watched this family dysfunction unfold over the years. When I told him about the disownment texts, the exclusion letter, and Madison's social media campaign, his response was blunt and eye-opening. "Jake, you realize you've been enabling 3 adults to avoid any responsibility for their own lives, right?" he said. "This isn't helping family. This is subsidizing their decision to be permanent children. You've made it so comfortable for them to be unemployed that they've forgotten how to function as adults." Alex walked me through the difference between helping someone through a crisis and enabling someone to avoid growing up. Helping meant supporting people while they worked toward independence. Enabling meant removing all consequences for poor decisions and creating a situation where dependency was more comfortable than self-sufficiency. Look at it objectively, Alex continued. Your dad hasn't looked for work in 4 years because he doesn't need to. Your mom treats spending your money like a full-time job. Madison has never held a real job because she's discovered that emotional manipulation pays better than actual employment. You haven't been helping them. You've been paying 3 people to remain helpless. I realized I'd been enabling 3 adults to avoid responsibility. That conversation was the wake-up call I needed to understand what I'd been doing wrong for 7 years. I wasn't supporting my family through difficult times. I was funding their choice to avoid adulthood. I'd created a system where taking my money was easier than earning their own, where emotional manipulation was more profitable than employment. Alex helped me see that my refusal to give Madison $85,000 wasn't selfish. It was the first healthy boundary I'd set in years. My family's extreme reaction proved that they viewed me as a resource to exploit rather than a person deserving of respect. They disowned you because you threatened their income stream, Alex pointed out. Think about that. They didn't try to understand your concerns or negotiate terms for the loan. They went straight to punishment and public humiliation because you dared to question their financial demands. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my family had been treating me like their personal ATM for so long that they'd forgotten I was a human being with my own financial goals and boundaries. The moment I acted like anything other than a money-dispensing machine, they decided I was broken and needed to be replaced or punished back into compliance. I decided to implement Operation Reality Check immediately. While I was coming to terms with 7 years of enabling behavior, my family was operating under the assumption that this was just a temporary disagreement that would blow over once I came to my senses and resumed my role as their financial provider. None of them made any effort to contact me directly or apologize for their extreme reactions. Dad didn't follow up on his "You're not my son" text with any attempt at reconciliation. Mom didn't acknowledge that maybe banning me from family events was an overreaction to a reasonable request for a business plan. Madison continued her social media campaign without any recognition that she might be the one in the wrong. Their silence told me everything I needed to know about how confident they were that I'd eventually cave. They were so accustomed to me funding their lifestyle that they couldn't imagine a world where the money stopped flowing. They assumed that a few weeks without their approval would bring me crawling back with an apology and a willingness to fund Madison's latest scheme without questions. The arrogance was breathtaking, but it was also liberating. They'd made it clear that our relationship was purely financial in their minds, so I was free to treat it as a business arrangement that they'd just terminated. They assumed I'd come crawling back with my checkbook. The first step in Operation Reality Check was documenting exactly how much money I'd given my family over the past 7 years. As a business owner, I keep meticulous financial records, so it didn't take long to compile a comprehensive accounting of every wire transfer, every bill payment, every credit card charge, and every cash handout I'd provided. The numbers were staggering even to me. $987,412 over 7 years. Nearly $1 million that I'd transferred from my construction company profits to fund 3 adults who'd chosen unemployment as a lifestyle. I broke it down by category and recipient. Dad had received $315,000 in mortgage payments, car payments, insurance, utilities, and monthly allowances. Mom had burned through $240,000 on shopping, home improvements, vacations, and personal expenses. Madison had consumed over $400,000 on rent, car payments, credit card bills, and her various failed business ventures. The most damning part was the trend analysis. The amounts had increased every year as their demands grew and their gratitude decreased. What started as temporary help with a few $100s here and there had escalated into a full-scale financial dependency where I was essentially supporting 3 people's complete lifestyles. The accounting showed I'd given them nearly $1 million. Armed with documentation of their complete financial dependency, I began the systematic termination of every support system I'd built to keep them comfortable. This wasn't an emotional decision driven by anger. It was a business decision executed with the same efficiency I brought to managing construction projects. I started with the credit cards. Over the years, I'd added my parents and Madison as authorized users on several of my business and personal credit accounts, so they could handle expenses without constantly asking for transfers. I called each credit card company and removed them from every account immediately. Next came the automatic payments. I'd set up recurring transfers to cover their mortgage, car payments, insurance premiums, utilities, and phone bills, so they wouldn't have to worry about managing basic adulting responsibilities. Every automatic payment was canceled that day. Finally, I closed the shared bank accounts and investment accounts that I'd funded for their use. Joint accounts that I'd established so they could access money for emergencies were converted to individual accounts in my name only. By the end of the day, my family had gone from having access to virtually unlimited financial resources to having exactly zero access to my money. I canceled every credit card and stopped every automatic payment. The financial reality hit my family within 48 hours, starting with the small stuff and escalating to full-scale panic as they realized the scope of what had happened. Madison was the first to discover the new reality when her credit card was declined at a coffee shop. Then, Mom's card was declined at the grocery store. Then, Dad's card was rejected at the gas station. Initially, they assumed it was some kind of technical error or temporary glitch. Dad called the credit card company to report the problem, only to be told that his authorized user status had been revoked. Mom tried to access the joint checking account online and found that her login credentials no longer worked. The panic set in when they realized that not only had their access to my money been terminated, but their automatic bill payments had stopped as well. Mortgage payment bounced. Car payment bounced. Insurance premiums went unpaid. Utility bills started arriving with overdue notices. Within a week, they were facing the financial reality that most adults deal with every day, having to pay their own bills with their own money. Except they didn't have any money because they hadn't worked in years. Their credit cards started declining at the grocery store. My family's response to this financial crisis was exactly what I'd expected: denial, blame, and desperate attempts to restore their access to my accounts without acknowledging any responsibility for the situation they'd created. Dad spent hours on the phone with banks trying to convince customer service representatives that there had been some kind of mistake. He couldn't understand why removing someone from your credit card accounts was legal, and he demanded that the bank restore his access immediately. Mom called my business accountant trying to get access to company accounts, claiming there was a family emergency that required immediate funds. When my accountant explained that only I had authorization to make changes to business accounts, she accused him of being part of some conspiracy to keep her from accessing family money. Madison posted dramatic updates on social media about how her vindictive brother had stolen her access to credit cards and bank accounts, painting herself as the victim of financial abuse rather than the recipient of 7 years of unlimited financial support. None of them made any attempt to contact me directly to discuss the situation or acknowledge their role in creating this crisis. Instead, they focused on trying to restore their access to my money through back channels, as if my decision to cut them off was just a technical problem that could be resolved without any actual conversation or accountability. They called the bank, trying to restore access to my accounts. Once I'd systematically cut off their access to my money, I knew it was only a matter of time before my family's pride would crumble and they'd make direct contact. But I wasn't about to let 7 years of manipulation and emotional blackmail continue just because they were finally facing the consequences of their choices. I changed my personal phone number and updated my email filters to automatically delete messages from their addresses. Any communication from my family would have to go through my business line or my business partner Alex, creating a professional buffer that would prevent them from using their usual emotional manipulation tactics. Alex agreed to serve as a witness for any contact attempts, documenting their desperation and demands, so I'd have evidence of their priorities when they came crawling back. We both knew that people who'd lived off my money for 7 years wouldn't last long without it, especially when they had 0 savings, 0 job skills, and 0 experience managing their own finances. Give it 2 weeks, Alex predicted. Once the bills start piling up and they realize the grocery store doesn't accept sob stories as payment, they'll be calling you begging. I prepared for their inevitable desperation with strategic patience. While I was preparing for the inevitable contact, I was also anticipating the specific manipulation tactics my family would try. After 7 years of funding their lifestyle, I knew exactly how they operated when they wanted money. Dad would try the guilt trip about family loyalty and everything they'd sacrificed to raise me. Mom would attempt emotional manipulation about how disappointed she was in the person I'd become. Madison would oscillate between victim mode and righteous anger, depending on which approach she thought would work. I prepared responses for each of their predictable tactics. When they tried to guilt me about abandoning family, I'd remind them that they were the ones who disowned me over a reasonable request for accountability. When they claimed they'd sacrificed for me, child, I'd point out that raising your children is a basic parental obligation, not grounds for unlimited access to your adult child's income. Most importantly, I prepared to document everything. Any phone calls would be recorded, any text messages would be screenshotted, any emails would be saved. If they wanted to reconcile, they'd have to acknowledge their mistakes and agree to reasonable boundaries, not just sweet-talk their way back to my checkbook. I knew exactly what manipulation tactics were coming next. The perfect opportunity to force this confrontation came when Alex suggested hosting a barbecue at my house for our business partners and contractor friends. It would be a relaxed weekend gathering where I could celebrate the success of my construction company with people who respected my professional achievements and personal boundaries. More importantly, it would create the ideal setting for my family's inevitable desperate contact. If they called while I was surrounded by successful business professionals who understood the difference between helping family and enabling dependency, their manipulation attempts would be exposed in front of people whose opinions I actually valued. I invited a dozen of my most trusted business associates, people who'd watched my company grow and who understood the challenges of managing family relationships when money was involved. These were adults who'd built their own successful businesses and who would immediately recognize the dysfunction of grown adults demanding money from family members. The timing was perfect. My family had been cut off for exactly 2 weeks, long enough for their financial crisis to reach critical mass, but not so long that they'd found alternative solutions. Bills would be overdue, credit cards would be maxed out, and pride would be giving way to panic. Alex was right. They were going to call. And when they did, they'd be doing it in front of an audience that would validate my position completely. The barbecue would be the perfect stage for their desperation. The barbecue was everything I'd hoped it would be. A celebration of legitimate business success, with people who'd earned their achievements through hard work and smart decisions. My backyard was filled with successful contractors, project managers, and business owners who understood the construction industry and respected what I'd built over the past decade. Alex had helped me organize the guest list perfectly. These were serious professionals who'd watched my company grow from a one-man operation to a major player in commercial construction. They were discussing real business challenges, sharing industry insights, and celebrating the kind of success that comes from competence and persistence rather than family handouts. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Here I was, surrounded by adults who paid their own bills and built their own wealth, while my family sat at home facing overdue notices because they'd chosen dependency over dignity for 7 years. The conversation was flowing. The weather was perfect, and I was genuinely enjoying the company of people who respected boundaries and understood that success requires actual effort. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely relaxed about my decision to cut off the family gravy train. I was celebrating business success when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Madison's number, the first direct contact from any family member since I'd implemented Operation Reality Check 2 weeks earlier. The timing was perfect, almost like she'd somehow known I was surrounded by successful people who would serve as the ideal audience for whatever desperation she was about to display. I gestured to Alex and the group to continue their conversation, while I stepped slightly away from the main gathering. But instead of walking inside for privacy, I stayed within earshot of my guests. Something told me this conversation was going to be worth sharing. "Jake," Madison's voice was already breaking before I even responded. "Jake, please tell me you'll talk to me. I know you're angry, but I need your help. We're in serious trouble." The desperation was immediate and complete. Gone was the entitled attitude from 2 weeks ago when she'd demanded $85,000 for her fake business. Gone was the righteous anger from her social media campaign. This was pure panic from someone who'd finally realized that bills don't pay themselves. "My rent is 3 weeks overdue," she continued, without waiting for my response. "The landlord is threatening eviction. The utilities are getting shut off tomorrow. I don't have money for groceries. Mom and Dad are in the same situation. The mortgage payment bounced, their car insurance lapsed, and Dad's BMW is about to get repossessed." She was laying out the complete scope of their financial collapse in real time, confirming everything Alex and I had predicted about what would happen when 3 unemployed adults suddenly had to face the reality of supporting themselves. Madison called, begging for money in front of everyone. I could see my guests had stopped their conversations and were now listening with fascination to this real-time demonstration of family financial dysfunction. These were business people who understood cash flow, personal responsibility, and the difference between temporary help and permanent dependency. "Madison," I said loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. "I'm going to put you on speakerphone so my friends can hear this conversation. I want them to understand exactly what kind of family dynamic I've been dealing with." The silence on the other end was deafening. Madison clearly hadn't expected her desperate plea to become a public performance, but she was too deep in crisis mode to hang up. "Jake, no, please don't," she started, but I'd already activated the speaker function. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my sister Madison," I announced to the group. "Madison, please tell my business partners how much money I've given you over the past 7 years." The power dynamic had shifted completely. Madison was now trapped between her desperate need for money and her humiliation at having our family's financial dysfunction exposed to a group of successful professionals. "Jake, this isn't fair," she whispered into the phone. "You can't embarrass me like this in front of strangers." "These aren't strangers," I replied with controlled satisfaction. "These are successful business owners who pay their own bills and support their own families. I thought they might be interested in hearing from someone who's never had to do either." Everyone heard her admit I'd been their personal ATM for years. The moment had arrived for me to deliver the justice that 7 years of financial exploitation had earned. Madison was on speakerphone, desperate and humiliated, while I was surrounded by people who would validate every word I was about to say. "Madison," I said, making sure my voice carried across the patio. "2 weeks ago, Dad texted me that I was no longer his son because I refused to give you $85,000 without a business plan. You launched a social media campaign calling me selfish and ungrateful. Mom sent me a letter banning me from family events." The silence from the phone was complete. Madison had no response because there was no defense for their behavior. "Now you're calling me crying because your rent is overdue and your utilities are getting shut off," I continued. "You want me to rescue you from the financial consequences of being unemployed adults who've been living off my construction company profits for 7 years. I could see my guests nodding in agreement. These were people who understood exactly what kind of manipulation I'd been dealing with, and they could see the justice in what was happening. But here's the thing, Madison. You can't disown someone and then expect them to keep paying your bills. You can't call someone not your son and then demand that he fund your lifestyle. You wanted financial independence from your personal ATM, so congratulations. You're about to learn what financial independence actually looks like." The controlled sarcasm was perfect, and my audience was clearly enjoying every word. These were professionals who'd built their success through discipline and accountability, and they were watching someone learn that actions have consequences. I told everyone that my family was learning financial consequences. The months following that barbecue phone call brought exactly the kind of character development my family had needed for 7 years. Faced with the reality of supporting themselves without access to my construction company profits, they discovered that they were actually capable of functioning as independent adults when they had no other choice. Dad found work within 3 weeks of his BMW getting repossessed. Turns out, his manufacturing skills were still relevant when the alternative was homelessness. He took a job at a local factory, making considerably less than what he'd been receiving in monthly allowances from me, but enough to cover basic expenses when combined with Mom's part-time work. Mom picked up shifts at a retail store and learned to budget for the first time in years. The woman who'd spent 7 years treating my credit cards like unlimited shopping passes suddenly became very interested in comparing prices and looking for sales. She downsized their lifestyle, sold unnecessary possessions, and discovered that financial responsibility was actually a learnable skill. Madison was the last to adapt, but even she eventually found employment as a server at a local restaurant. The sister who'd turned avoiding work into an art form was now earning tips and learning that actual employment pays better than emotional manipulation when you don't have a successful brother to subsidize your lifestyle. The most telling change was their attitude toward money. When you're spending your own earnings instead of someone else's profits, every dollar suddenly matters. They learned to distinguish between wants and needs, developed appreciation for hard work, and stopped treating financial support like an entitlement. They finally learned what financial independence actually means. As for me, cutting off their gravy train turned out to be the best business and personal decision I'd made in years. My construction company continued growing, without the drain of supporting 3 unemployed adults, and I was able to invest profits back into equipment and expansion rather than funding other people's lifestyle choices. The emotional relief was even more significant than the financial benefits. For the first time in 7 years, my phone calls with family weren't disguised requests for money. When we did talk, it was about genuine family topics rather than thinly veiled financial negotiations. My parents eventually apologized for the disownment texts and letters, acknowledging that they'd let years of financial dependency cloud their judgment about family relationships. Madison took longer to come around, but she eventually admitted that learning to support herself had been better for her self-respect than continuing to live off her brother's success. Our relationships are healthier now because they're based on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. I occasionally help with genuine emergencies, but within reasonable boundaries and with clear expectations about accountability and repayment. The difference between helping family and enabling dependency is something they finally understand, not because I explained it to them, but because they lived through the consequences of confusing the two for 7 years. Cutting off their gravy train taught them the difference between family and finance.